My name is Joshua Waits. I am the archivist at Virginia Theological Seminary. Today is August 2nd, 2023, and I am here taking the oral history of the Reverend Jamie Samilio, correct?
Samilio.
Samilio. Thank you for being with me today.
Thanks for inviting me.
To begin with, what is your preferred way to be addressed as far as your name? Reverend, Jamie, Mother, Doctor?
Jamie works for me. Jamie's good. Jamie's fine. I have been called Mother, but it usually never preceded my name. So that's not anything that I identify with, really. In fact, I think it would be better if the whole Episcopal Church would just adopt Reverend, like Reverend John, Reverend Bill, Reverend Sally, because it levels the playing field. And then the grammar police come in and say it's the Reverend. It has to be the Reverend. And it's like, okay. So we're stuck in the patriarchy. Because until we've got generations of people who go by who don't see the father figure is the head of the church, you will constantly have female rectors who have got male associates who, anytime there's a problem, the people turn and go, well, John, can you fix this? And the rector is standing in front of them because Father John must know the answer.
Yeah.
Mother Mary may not. So I'd rather everybody was just Reverend. But it's a tough thing. Changing culture is not easy. And I think that's actually what we're talking about today, isn't it?
Very much, yes.
Okay. Well, why don't you go ahead and ask me whatever it is you want to ask me?
Okay. Do you have preferred pronouns that we use?
I prefer you use the Jamie, she, her.
All right.
Yo, it, whatever. But yeah, female pronouns.
All right. And how do you identify?
How do I identify?
Like on the LGBTQ spectrum.
I'm gay.
All right. Would you mind telling me your date and place of birth?
Do I have to give you the year? No.
Not if you don't wish to.
My birthday is May 26th, and I was born in Erie, Pennsylvania, right up there on the lake, on one of the Great Lakes.
Excellent.
That's where I'm from.
I always like to start off by asking, could you give us like a summary version, Cliff Notes version of your like spiritual journey, your spiritual autobiography? Well,
if I gave you the year, you'd know this is going to take a while. But yeah, I guess I could. So I come from a little town that is definitely a Roman Catholic place. And I was educated from literally kindergarten all the way through my undergrad degree in a Catholic schools, all Roman Catholic schools. My father was a Roman Catholic and my mom was like a Methodist, but had other Protestant denominations practiced in her family. She was one of 11 kids. But my parochial education had really a huge impact on me. And I mean, I was taught by the Sisters of St. Joseph from kindergarten through 10th grade. And then I switched to the Sisters of Mercy and went to Mercyhurst. But I went to Villa Grade School and Villa High School, and that had a big impact because I had religion class either every day or every week going to school. And the thing that I saw and that I experienced was how the sisters, especially when I'm in grade school, on the type of relationship they had with each other, and they all seemed like they were very happy and at peace. And it was kind of interesting. It's something that I wanted. And I felt this sense of call at a very, very young age. I was probably 9 years old. And I had this idea that I was going to have something important to say to people, but I didn't know what it meant because I thought I should be a priest. Well, little girls aren't priests in the Roman Catholic Church, and it was not possible. But from those early days, it's no wonder that I ended up being a priest, and I'm called to preach. And I guess I just knew that early on. And a lot of it had to do with learning about God, and we learned about other religions. By the time I got out of high school, I mean, we were taking classes like Elizabeth Kubler-Ross on death and dying, or I took that class. I took the Documents of Vatican II, which is oddly enough how I became an Episcopalian. But I never had a sense that God wasn't around. And there was a church in the school I went to, okay, and a chapel where all the nuns, that was actually, the convent was on the other side of the school. It was a rather large complex. And so, early on, I developed that sense of spirituality and that understanding that God is right there with us. So I have never been in the closet. I didn't even know there was a closet. I wasn't anything. And in fact, I'd have to say I didn't even identify as being gay until I was 18. And my best friend kissed me, and all of a sudden it was like, oh, that's it. I mean, prior to this, I had gone out with some guys, and the only thing I could think of was, okay, if this is what men and women do together, I'm really not surprised. There's like 50% of the population is getting divorced. Like, what's the big deal? And then my best friend kisses me, and it's like, fireworks, like, oh my goodness, what the heck was that? And I realized, oh, what's that thing called? Oh, gay. That's it. I must be gay. So, I mean, I immediately knew it.
Yeah.
But there I was in college, and I ended up becoming an Episcopalian because I started going out to the gay bar in Erie, and going out dancing. And come on, it was it's the 70s and early 80s, and there's dancing and everything. And so we're going out, and there was a guy who would always go to the bar. His name was Tony. And when the bar closed down, he would invite everyone, whether he knew you or not, to come back to his house for breakfast. So everybody in the bar just left and went to Tony's house. And he was one of these guys. He was a used car salesman, and he believed right on red, left on red, straight on red with caution. He just lived life like that. He just let everybody into his life. So I found myself sitting at Tony's house one night, and there was a guy who was sitting there. His name's Jeff, and we started chatting. And don't forget, this is a year and a half, a couple of years after I have taken the Documents of Vatican II. I said that's how I became an Episcopalian. So I started having this conversation with this guy, and it's wintertime. So he's dressed mostly in black, and he's got this one of these, lumberjack type shirts on that's padded. Everybody in Pennsylvania always, it's cold. It's the middle of winter. And we started talking about the church, and we started talking about the difference between Roman Catholics and Episcopalians. And we have this, heated discussion about the Documents of Vatican II. And the fact is, I didn't believe in some of what the Documents of Vatican II. I did. The canons of the church, of the Roman Catholic Church, were kind of at odds at what I really believed. And he pointed out the fact that if you don't believe it all, you're actually not Roman Catholic. And we have this discussion. It's like 3 o'clock in the morning and 4 o'clock in the morning. And so, nice to meet you. Next week, I go to the bar, I go to Tony's house, and there he is again. So we continue to have this discussion. And when we're done with this discussion, and I'm learning all this stuff about the Episcopal Church, and he stands up to leave. He told me he was at Mercyhurst College, and that's where I was going to school. And he stands up to leave, and he pulls his collar together. And I kept looking at him thinking, he wore that same outfit last week. Does he not have any other clothes? He stands up and he puts his collar together and he reaches in his pocket and puts his collar tab in. And I looked at him and I said, oh, you're with the theater department. What play are we doing that's got a priest in it? At which point he says to me, he goes, I'm not with the theater department. I'm with campus ministry. I'm the Episcopal priest assigned to campus ministry. And we should not waste all those years of parochial training that you had. I need a Sunday school teacher. How would you like to come and teach Sunday school at the Episcopal Church? I'm in charge of 2 missions, and I'd like to know if you'd like to come and teach. That's how I became an Episcopalian. I was received in the church a couple years later, a year or so later, by Donald Davis, Bishop Donald Davis, who actually was I went to high school with his son, Addison. I graduated with Addison. And so it was kind of interesting that I became an Episcopalian. And then I moved out of Erie and I spent the next almost 40 years outside of Washington, D.C. in Virginia. And when I was in Virginia, God called. And in fact, Jeff wanted me, the priest, wanted me to seek ordination. And I'm like, okay, I'm an art major at a liberal college. I did inhale. Okay. And I'm gay. I really don't think that I am, the figure that you want to put up in front of the community as an example of how to live. Are you kidding? You must have the wrong number. So God called, told God, you gotta have the wrong number. He kept calling. I get to Virginia and I ended up being the youth minister at St. Michael's in Arlington. And I was working in publishing at the time. And they came up with this program called MACE, a Master's in Christian Education, with Locke Bowman and Dr. Amy, at the time, Amy Geary Dyer, Dr. Dyer. And so I went and decided to apply for that program. And the priest at the church that I was at had a very strong belief that being gay is a choice. It's a choice. You choose to live in sin. And I went through the process of filling out the application. She thought it was a great idea for me to go to VTS and get a master's in Christian education, because I was the superintendent of the Sunday school. I'm now the youth minister there. I was great with the kids. All those years of parochial school religion class, taught me all kinds of things to teach people about Jesus. And I loved doing it and I loved teaching. And so going and getting that degree was fine. But when it came across that I got my letters of recommendation and several of them said, you should really look at her for the priesthood, I didn't write them. They came from other sources. I ended up getting set up, as it were. I found this out later, that I was asked directly whether or not I was a practicing homosexual in my intake exam with the psychiatrist. You have to have a psychiatric review. Mm-hmm. And he asked me directly that question, and I don't lie. So I said yes. He then asked me 4 times whether or not he should tell VTS this information. And 3 times I said no. And the final time I said, after he convinced me that things in the church were changing, and the fact that I had been with my partner then back, like 12 or 13 years, he said, this is what we should do. We should really tell them this is good. This is good. This is positive. So I ended up going and putting my application in, and I was turned down for acceptance to Virginia Theological Seminary. This was in the early 90s. And the reason I was turned down, I was called in, and the day that I got the phone call was the day that on the Eastern Seaboard, all of the phone lines went out, like the phones weren't working and stuff. There was a big thing that happened. On that day, I got a phone call and it went through and I got called to come to VTS. So I went and I met with Dean Reed and then Associate Dean Martha Horn. And Dean Reed had just written this paper on human sexuality with Bob Prichard.
Oh,
It had just come out on homosexuality.
wholesome
I-
something.
Yes, it's actually in the material you sent me. I am well aware of what that is. I
Yeah.
read it all the way through.
Mhm.
And, you know, it says, oh, 90% of the population is straight and 10% of the population is gay, which is pretty much understood by most of the world. I mean, that was the accepted number for, still is, I think, in many cases. Gender fluidity is changing that number a bit, but it went on basically to say that it's a choice. So at any rate, you move forward here, and I went in to talk to him. And I asked him, I said, you know, he looked at me and he said, Jamie, I need to tell you that you are not being accepted at Virginia Seminary. And the reason is that you are a practicing homosexual. And according to Virginia Seminary's policies at this point, you are not permitted. It is deemed that you would be a bad influence on the community. And I sat there a minute and I said, how was the rest of my application? I mean, I had to go get my GREs. I had to take my GREs. I had to write this paper. I had to put all my experience on it. I collected how was the rest of my application? And he sat there and he didn't say anything. And Martha Horn actually said, Jamie, it was fine. In fact, we were excited to have you because the Masters in Christian Education program is about to launch its own curriculum. And they're about to publish curriculum, and you work in publishing. And I said, yes, I do. And you know how to publish and put together and literally create and print books. And I said, yes, I do. And how to mail them and distribute them. Absolutely. I said, I was excited to read about that. And I said, and she said, your application was fine. There was nothing wrong with it. And I said, okay, so, but I'm not being accepted because I'm gay. And he said, yes, that's right. That's the policy. And I said, okay, I have a question. He said, what's that? And I said, do you think that there are currently any students at Virginia Seminary who are going to school here who are gay? He said, yes, there are. In fact, I'm positive there are. I know that there are people here who are going to school here. And I said, so I was just over at the library and there's this big thing up on the wall and it says, I am the truth and the life and the way. And I said, so because I've told the truth, I can't come to school here. But because somewhere on their applications, they've either lied or it's been a lie of omission, you're okay with them being here. And there was a long pause and he said, their paperwork is clean. And I said, okay.
Hmm.
And he said, so what would happen if I vowed celibacy? Would you forgive me and then let me in? He took a minute and he said, you know, I'm really sorry you're not coming to seminary here. And I said, well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to pray for you because you, sir, are a bigot. And I said, but I also understand and respect that the policies of this place won't let me in. And your job is to uphold those policies. So I'm going to pray for you because you are a bigot. And he looked at me and he said, I guess I am. So I left there and a day later, Martha Horn called me and asked me to go out to lunch. And we sat and we had a long talk. And she said she was going to work to get this changed, that I should be able to go to school. And so every year I would call Martha and I'd say, Martha, can I come to school yet? No, not for year 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. Finally, one year I said, Martha, can I come to school? Like every year in April, just before you apply, I would call her. One year she said, you can come to school, but it's don't ask, don't tell. You can't tell anybody who you are. I said, no, I need to be able to wait, Martha. I'm going to wait until I can come to school and be the child that God created me to be, just as I am. And when I can come to school, then you can tell me. So I didn't go. So I waited and I called again in 1 year. Finally, the next year, she answered and said, you can come to school now. She said, but you live close by. And she goes, because here's the thing, you can come to school, but you can't stay on campus. They still hadn't lifted the housing restriction. And I said, okay. And that's the year that I went and applied to school. And I already knew Dr. Dyer. I knew Amy Dyer. I had met her years before, in fact. And so I went through my interview with her, and she couldn't quite figure out how I was so sure that I was going to get accepted to the program, because she's the one who did the accepting. And it took a long time for us to finally have the conversation, after a long time after I was already in the program, that she came to realize why I was so sure. It's because I'd been talking to the dean for half a dozen years. And in fact, I did something on conflict, and I did the section for one of my classes on conflict management, and also on appearances and things, and on how we are swayed by people's appearances and what they look like. And I'd come in that day in cutoff jeans and a t-shirt. And what I did was I had gone to Martha Horn and borrowed one of her collars. So I gave them all something to do and said, okay, I'll be back in just a minute. I'm going to run over to the ladies' room. I'll be right back. And when I came back in, I had changed. I had had my nails done, everything. I changed into a full dress suit with the collar, the whole 9 yards. And when I walked back in the door and Amy looked up at me, she just was like, because there I am, a layperson in a collar, like this is like giant sin, on the seminary. And she said, oh my goodness, where in the world did you get the collar? You're not supposed to be wearing one of those. And I said, it's okay, it's the dean's. At which point she was like, we talked after that, like, what are you doing with the dean's? How do you know that? Tell me the rest of the story. So I did do that, but I got my MACE degree. And as far as what the temperature of the seminary was at the time, I think the first LGBTQ group had formed at some point. In fact, Martha called me and she said, I want to know if you'd like to be part of this group, even though, I wasn't in school just then. She said, I'd like to know if you'd like to go join the group of people who's there. Because allies, it wasn't just gay people, straight people had also joined the group as allies at the time. And I remember sitting there and listening to them talking about how they would want to do, let's do this event. Maybe we could run a blood drive, maybe this way we'll show everybody that we're just normal people capable of reaching out and giving things back to God, and that we're capable of just like everybody else. We're just, we're able to serve in ministry in the church as an LGBTQ community. And I listened to them. And I said, I don't think that's what I want to do. I don't think I want to do that. And they said, what do you mean? And I said, why don't you join the people who are already running the blood drive and just go and be yourself? Go help them as an openly gay man, or they came up with that L word. I hate that L word. Come on, I went to an all-girls school as a kid. Let me tell you, The worst thing you can call a little girl in an all-girls school. I can't even say the word. It's like saying the F word for me. It's the L word. And this whole new thing came about. It is only politically correct to call you by that. You're not gay anymore. And I'm like, screw that. So you're not calling me by that name. At any rate, I said, can't you just go be who you are? Why do you want to separate yourself from the community and do things on your own as a group to show them that you're normal? I don't get it. And no, I just want to go out there and be the best version of Jamie that I can be, just as God created me. And I don't understand wanting to discern that this is a gay run event. Look, we're gay, and look what a nice job we did. I don't get that. I don't think I want to do that. So I didn't join the group. Or I would have been one of the founding members that you heard about in the archives sometime later. But I'm not, because I didn't. I went on and I had already become the youth minister at a church in Arlington, and that's how I ended up at the MACE program. But at any rate, I got to the point where I was at a church in Virginia and things did open up a little bit. I switched and I started going to St. John's Lafayette Square in downtown DC. I felt it, indeed God called back, and I explored ordained ministry in Virginia and was basically told, welcome to the Old Dominion, don't bother to apply. Peter Lee was the bishop, and he has been an advocate, but wasn't always, he was careful. He was treading lightly. He needed to. But basically I was told, don't bother. Just don't put yourself, don't put your church through it. Don't bother. So I went to St. John's Lafayette Square, and Jane Dixon was there. Some of this, of course, overlaps. I mean, this is overlapping stories I'm telling you, but it's she who worked with Martha Horn to get some of the policies changed at VTS. And so I found myself in front of Jane Dixon, and that was, I ended up not becoming a priest in the Diocese of Washington. I went back and I used my MACE degree and became the interim director of Christian Ed at Holy Cross in Dunloring, Virginia. And after spending 20 years at St. John's Lafayette Square, I switched and I went over to Dunloring, and I was there about a year and a half. And their associate rector said to me, I think you need to go to the discernment conference for ordination. And I'm like, is God calling back? Really? You've been calling me for 32 years. You've got to be kidding. I kept hanging up on you. I kept telling you it was the wrong number. And then I tried to call you and just couldn't get an answer, and was told not to bother, and got your calling back again. And I had all but resigned myself that it wasn't going to happen. And this time all of the doors flew open and I got accepted. And Bishop Susan Goff said, yes, Jamie, I'm going to ordain you. And she did. Some of the hardest things I had to do was even after the MACE degree. I remember, and this, my fellow MACE people remember this too, my classmates remember. They were all sitting there and we all had to introduce ourselves, and I was sitting there trying to think of what I was going to say, and it was like on the first day of class or so, and there was a couple of them who were sitting off onto the side, and they were talking about their kids and whatever and such. And one of them said, you know what I hate? I hate it when people who don't have kids talk about their nieces and nephews. And I had just been sitting there thinking about what I was going to say about my nephew, because he's the only, I don't have any kids. My older sister, kids are older, and he's the one who I was closest to. Well, I can't say that. What am I going to say? You know, what in the world am I going to say? And it was very uncomfortable. And we talked about it later, and I told them what they said and what impact that had. And it never dawned on them that, you know, I'm sorry, you who are not part of the mainstream, oh my goodness, don't talk about stuff you don't know about. What are you? But what I do know about is that that's my family. Don't talk about my family because it's not part of the mainstream norm. They're the man and a woman and children. Like, oh, okay. We had a long talk about it. They apologized, actually. They said it just never occurred to them. And in some ways, when I just did Sacred Ground, you know, you don't know what you don't know. And when you start learning the truth about how you have been socialized and oriented, you don't understand, you don't have empathy for the other people. You just don't. And it's kind of an awakening. You wonder, like, how in the world did I live this whole time thinking one thing, thinking I was cruising along and how good I was at doing this and that, and then finding out I've been offending people for decades, you know, like, oh. So I went back as an Anglican studies student and was walking across the campus, and I ran into Kathy Grebe, and I was pretty upset. She asked me what was wrong. I mean, I was like I am now, tears in my eyes. And she said, asked me what was going on. And I said, it's hard to have to come back to a place where you've been rejected and go to school here, because there was so much pain in this place for me. And what's funny is I worked for the Diocese of Washington for like 8.5 years, and they had rejected me. And I remember that same feeling walking into Diocesan House the very first day and going up to my office. And I realized, that is another part of my story. The Reverend Canyon Mary Sillerud became my spiritual director when I was going to go for the discernment process. The rector of the church in Arlington said, oh, you need a spiritual director. And Mary will tell you that I got sent to her to, quote, straighten me out and explain to her, explain to me, you know, that being gay was a choice. And instead, we are now family. And she came to understand, and she came to change. And together we discovered what it really meant to walk with someone in spiritual direction, and what it really meant to walk in each other's shoes. And it became really clear that, you know what, sometimes you really have to spend some time with somebody to change your perspective and to understand that people are just people, and that God calls people, and we need to stop, you know, cherry picking pieces of scripture. And probably the most powerful piece of scripture does come out of Romans, and it's right after the thing that, you know, the piece of scripture that people most often use to club the LGBTQ plus community over the head. And it says, "Woe be to you who stands in the way, whose one's desire is only to serve God." And I think that that's probably what we hung on to most of all. That's the lesson. It's a lesson we learned. So now, do you have any questions for me? Because I haven't shut up for, I don't know, don't get me started. I'm a storyteller. You know, that's what happens.
Well, thank you for all of that. And thank you for sharing your story. I find it Um, so many parts of your story that are truly fascinating. So you grow up with this Roman Catholic education,
Mhm.
um, and you did not find, your story, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but from what I'm hearing, your Catholic education was not the horror story, nuns whacking you, with rulers all the time. You actually were inspired by them. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah. It was one of
Uh,
the finest schools in the city.
and did you said you felt this sense of call when you were 9, did you consider that it may be a call to religious life in the Catholic Church, or was it that you felt called to the altar?
Oh, my goodness. Oh, yes. I mean, it was one of these things like, oh, yeah, you should become a nun. And I'm like, I knew I'm not supposed to become a nun. No, I'm supposed to I want to become a priest.
Mm,
It's like, no, girls aren't priests. You can't do that. All right, well, then I'm not doing it.
mm.
I'm supposed to be a priest. And
And
I could never resolve it. I knew God called me to ministry, but it wasn't to become a nun. But yes, I was a very good Catholic girl. You bet. I absolutely did what those nuns told me to do. Let me be clear about this. They said good little girls, young women, should absolutely never sleep with men out of wedlock. Never. It's a sin. And I never did.
they should be proud of their tutelage.
Absolutely. I did exactly what they said. Just be careful what you ask for.
Do you think, um,
God, that's going to be in the transcript.
well, you talk about how you were inspired by their relationship with each other and how happy they felt. Do you think that has had some lasting impact on how internalize and interpret uh, women loving each other?
No, not
No?
particularly. What I found is that they had a bond with each other. They were family.
Mhm.
They were family. That was, that was what they were. They were friends. There was no intimacy between them. They were good to one another. They sat and they laughed. They ate lunch together and laughed together. They were in the same room having lunch with us. They weren't sequestered. They were at a big table in the middle of the room with the entire school around them. And the
Mm.
little Italian ladies cooked lunch. And they weren't just nuns. There were some lay teachers there too. But that whole group of people were kind and considerate towards one another and helpful to one another. And there was just this nice, calm relationship.
Mm.
And they taught us religion, and they taught us that we should care about one another. And oh my goodness, the reason that I was a good lector at St. John's Lafayette Square has everything to do with the Sisters of St. Joseph making us all read out loud every day, cold, out of a book they'd give us. Open your book to this page. All right, starting here, 1 paragraph each. Everybody go. And we would have to read in turn every day. Every day, almost all the way through 6th grade, I think. So yeah, made
It's
really
one way
good.
to get over public speaking fears.
Yeah, made good practice for being a lector. So,
And then you said, you never came out. You had this sort of
I
revelation
didn't.
of,
Well, go ahead.
no. So no, go finish what you were saying. So you never actually, you were never in, as it were. Is that a better way of putting it?
Well, once I figured out that I was actually attracted to my friend, yes, I was in because I didn't know who to tell. I felt like, oh my goodness, have I sinned? I need a priest. I feel, what have I done?
Mm.
I needed to kind of figure it out. And then, yes, I did practice being in and out. I mean, I told my sisters, I told my family, but I had to be very careful back in the day. You didn't just tell people that. Over the years, we've received death threats. I got fired once for being gay. And it was legal. I was working in Maryland, and it's still, I think, legal in Maryland to fire somebody for their, no, I think they changed that. At any rate, at the time, it was quite legal to fire someone for being gay.
Mm.
And I was indeed dismissed for that reason. So, yeah, you didn't tell everybody, but was I out? Yes, I was out. But I also, you know, I'm still, I never was, and I'm still not into PDAs. I'm not into it. Here's a little social experiment. If I were to say to you, Joshua, tell me 5 things about yourself, would being gay be in the first 5? Was that the one thing that you identify with the most? I mean, it'd be like, I have 2 sisters. I grew up in Pennsylvania on the lake. I play the piano and I paint. I like doing that. I know how to drive stick shift. I come from a huge family. You're going to have to get to 10, 12, you know, I'm married. Now, it might come out if I tell you I'm married and you ask me who I'm married to and I tell you it's a female. But being gay has never been even one of the top 5 things about myself that I instantly identify with. And if you ask anybody who's straight to tell them 5 things about themselves, they don't say, I'm straight.
Mm.
Do they? I mean, have you ever said to somebody, you know, hi, what do you do? Tell me about yourself. And they go, well, first of all, I want you to know I'm straight. You know, it's and if they said that to me, I'd say, that's okay, this is taken. You know, you know, I don't get it. So I have never, I self-identified myself as, that's one of the top things I feel people would need to know to get to know me. I try to be a really good neighbor and friend. I love telling stories. I like going to the movies. Think about things that you want people to know about you when you're getting to know them. Where the heck does, you know, I guess it'd be tantamount to saying to somebody, tell me about yourself. And they say, I'm straight. I like the missionary position. Like, what? How stupid and insane does that sound? It sounds just as crazy as looking at a gay person and saying, I want you to know I'm okay with you being gay. And let me tell you, I have turned to some straight people who have said some pretty dumb things and were trying to tiptoe and said, I want you to know the fact, Joshua, that you like to sleep with women is okay with me. I just want you to know that's okay with me. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what your preference is, but I'm just saying to you that, you know, I've said that back to people before. I want you to know it's okay with me that you're straight. You know, seriously, I think your whole community is fine. 90% of the world. And
I think you should have the same rights as the rest of us.
Right. Every time I have said that to somebody, they've said something like, oh my goodness, have I sounded that dumb? Yeah, yes, you have. You sound that dumb. And I think that that's probably what underpins the foundation of the idea of let's have an LGBTQ plus group so that we can show everyone we're normal and can do things together like normal people.
Mm.
Oh my goodness. Can we all just get along? You know, can't we all just be one people? You go to Europe and they could care less. Well, sure, there are some, but for the most part, it's just not the issue that it is here.
Very true.
Yeah.
What was it like, you know, in your early 20s when you were going to college and you were still Roman Catholic and you had accepted, you know, that you are attracted to women? What was it like still being Roman Catholic at that time?
Frankly, I didn't start going to church as an adult until I went to the Episcopal church. My parents sent me to church school, but they quit going to church when I was like 3. I went to church in school. I went to church at school. We almost never went to church, except my sister Cheryl, when she could drive, would take me to church, and we would go to the church up the street, but she would take me to church.
Mm,
But my family were not churchgoers. They got angry at the church and quit going.
mm,
And it was my dad who was the Roman Catholic. My mother had converted, so she didn't particularly care. And
yeah.
she ran that part of the house anyway. So dad was happy to get up and go golfing. So in fact, it was difficult sometimes in religion class because they'd say, what color were the vestments on Sunday? And I'd never have any idea because I wasn't there. And when I told Sister Theogene, she'd ask that question. I'd say, I don't know. We didn't go to church on Sunday. What do you mean you didn't go to church on Sunday? Why didn't your family go? It was like, oh, please don't ask me. Please don't ask me what colors. I did not know what colors they were. So yeah, I went to church I went to the Episcopal church in college, and I already knew they accepted me because I
Yeah.
got told so after going to the gay bar by some guy wearing black who was campus ministry.
Yeah, you encountered Episcopal evangelism in a gay bar, yeah, as it were.
Actually, from what I understand, that was the mission. There was no integrity group. There was no outreach to the gay community in Erie, Pennsylvania at the time. And the bishop actually had assigned him to do some outreach, and he was failing miserably. And we knew everybody. And so we got to be very good friends and then invited him into the community. And he did, in fact, start the outreach and started a newsletter, and they eventually started an integrity chapter. And they eventually, there's now a nice, thriving Christian gay community up there. But can you imagine, there you are going out trying to make inroads to the gay community, and you approach somebody and say, it's nice to meet you and whatever, and you want to come and have dinner, and then it's like, would you like to talk about God? It's like, no. Next. Don't
Yeah,
talk to
no.
him. It's Grace. But it was very different because Sylvia and I knew everybody. We knew the whole community. And so it was a lot easier to get introductions. And so we had house masses and things like that. Invited a bunch of people over, and then you got to know more people, and actually started making inroads in his congregations, and some folks started actually attending church. So it was a nice growth for those communities.
Mm.
You have to, I have to make a note and say, by the way, I talked about you a bunch, but didn't give your actual name. So I'll have to ask him whether or not I can divulge that information.
Yeah. When you tell your story, there's a lot of rejection in it. Fired from one job. Don't even try to discern in Virginia. When you were younger, girls aren't allowed to be priests.
Yeah.
The blatant rejection when you first apply at VTS. Even your recurring phone calls with Martha Horn, it's like, every year, still there's another reminder of that rejection. What got you through those rejections, and sort of also strengthen your resolve to keep pressing towards this call that you felt? Why didn't you just give up?
Try not to think about it. You know, a little bit of the Scarlett O'Hara. I'm not going to think about that today. I'll think about that tomorrow. Right now, I think I'm going to go to work and grow my business. And on Sunday, I'm going to go to church and, figure it out. And I tried not going to church and it didn't feel very good. Left a big empty spot. Not putting distance between myself and God, and not worshiping in the tradition I'd come to love did not feel right. So I didn't stop doing it. Okay, but I did it on my terms. I engaged in ministries that I knew that were needed, that were positive, and that's what I did. And I actually, during one of those rejections, I'm pretty sure I know what I said, because some of this stuff I said, and I didn't make it up. It just kind of came out of my mouth, that those words that are, don't worry about what you're supposed to say at the time. God will put the words in your mouth. And at one of those, I said, God has called me to ministry, and the fact that the Episcopal Church has not figured out what to do with me is not my problem. It's the Episcopal Church's problem. Okay, God's called me to ministry. Whether you ordain me or not doesn't mean that God has not called me to ministry, to teach and to preach and to be out there in the world doing what God has called me to do. Okay, so this is not my problem. God's called me to ministry. You can't figure out what to do with me. Let me know when you figure it out. And that was it. It's like, okay, this just isn't, it's not ready yet. It's like you check the oven. Is it cooked yet? No. Should we pull it out early? No. Let it sit there. When it's done, we'll pull it out and do something with it. Okay, but for right now, I just have to wait. Well, what do you do in the meantime? Well, you go on and you live your life. You go on and you live your life. You do the next right thing in front of you. Wait, let me be sad and dwell on this. Okay, I'm done. Now, can we just move along? It doesn't, in the same way, and in fact, this is one of those theological things. It's something happens, something wonderful happens. And so what we tend to do is we tend to build a monument on the place where that wonderful, fabulous thing has happened. Okay, we build a church on it. And if we stay in that moment and in that church, we end up having what the Reverend Luis Leon calls an edifice complex. Okay, we begin worshiping the building. And so in some ways, in that same line of thought, when something horrible happens, we can't sit in that moment either. When a good things happen and good moments happen, we're called to go forward from there into the world and spread that good news. In the same way that when bad things happen, we are called to go out into the world and set that aside. We cannot dwell in that place forever. Okay, you can't dwell in the good moment that happened and try to hang on to it. Okay, because if you do that, you're hiding it from the whole world. It's inside here, and nobody can see it when you hang on to it like that. We're supposed to open it up and let it go. Well, the same thing when something bad happens. If you hang on to this thing, eventually your hands aren't free to do anything else. And in fact, you're captured there. So you also have to open your hands up and let it go. I made that up just for you.
Well,
right now, on the spot, just made that up, but seemed to work well.
Well, thank you.
Sure.
I'm trying to put a timeline together.
Excuse me, one second. Dear person transcribing this, I'm so sorry.
Life has gone out in here. I'm interested about like sort of the timing, because you said you got called by the phone call that there had been the phone lines went down on the eastern seaboard and
in the 90s.
I'm wondering if that was in 1993,
Yeah, I think so.
because that would have been when that, the two hurricanes and the tropical storm met, and it caused the blizzard that went through the south and, um, power outages and all the, because
No,
also,
y-
because you met with Dean Reed,
yes,
who retires in
right,
93, and Martha Horn becomes dean in 94.
correct.
So
That's the timing. That's the story right there.
yeah, so, and then you have this, um, relationship that rose, with Martha Horn sort of saying, because not only you, but others, but certainly you seem to be a catalyst that gets Martha Horn going, we're going to change this policy. Um, but was it just an annual conversation with her, or did you and her actually grow a stronger bond and friendship over those years?
No, it was just, I called her once a year that's it.
And I'm assuming,
March 12th, 1993. It says a massive storm system broke down nearly half of the US's population. Sounds like that's probably about right.
yeah, I'm thinking I remember that particular instance because I remember being in the snow in Georgia, and my walking with my aunt, and I fell down and she dragged me for 20 feet through a snowbank, and my uncle had to say, pick the child up. But and it was 93.
No, it was literally, I called her once a year on the phone. I didn't have it, other than going out to lunch and having that conversation with her at one point afterwards.
Mhm.
I did not see her in person or anything about any of this.
Okay.
I made a phone call to her and she took my call every year for several years.
And was it around that same time when you went to start working at St. John's Lafayette Square?
No, I went to St. John's Lafayette Square. Yeah, just as it was just prior to Luis Leon, literally about 3 months prior to Luis Leon becoming the rector.
Okay. And you said you were there for 20 years?
Just about 20 years, yeah.
And you were the youth minister?
No, I was the youth minister at St. Michael's in Arlington.
Okay, so you were just
I left there in
Mhm.
93. So we're talking, I was the youth minister from what, 89, 90, 91, yeah, or maybe 90, 91, 92, 93.
Mhm.
I was the youth minister in Arlington under Charles Gill.
And so at St. John's Lafayette Square, you were just a parishioner?
I was a parishioner, but I was on the altar guild and the flower committee, and I became part of the pastoral care team, and I served on the altar with Luis at the 8 o'clock service almost so many Sundays.
Mhm.
Yeah, there weren't too many 8 o'clock people, but I was there so many Sundays.
And Bishop Jane Dixon, though she wasn't bishop at the time.
It was Bishop Ronald Haynes.
Mhm. But Jane Dixon started working there while you were there as well. Is that what you?
Jane Dixon was the suffragan bishop
I see.
of Edow, Episcopal Diocese of Washington. Ronald Haynes was the bishop.
So how did she try to convince you? Because didn't you say she
No, you
had a
have to
hand?
fast forward all the way to, you have to go all the way through the 90s. Now you're in 2000 by the time I engaged Jane Dixon.
Okay, so it wasn't. I'm trying to see because
No,
we were
I
overlapping.
left and went to St. John's, and probably in the mid-90s, I looked at ordination in the Diocese of Washington, mid-90s. And I definitely got rejected there, but I kept going to St. John's Lafayette Square and I stayed there.
Okay.
And I did all kinds of stuff. So I got rejected by the Diocese of Washington. Well, it's like, did I ever actually become a postulant there? That's the question they ask when you go to Virginia. Were you ever denied postulancy? And it's like, no, I wasn't. I didn't. They had a different type of discernment program.
Right.
And so, I never was a postulant and then denied ordination. I never became a postulant in DC because they basically took the field from 12 candidates down to 3. And they said they were only taking as many as they thought they could place in the next 4 years. And that was it. A matter of your sense of call did not seem to fall into it. It was a matter of how many candidates they could place. And so I didn't end up in the Diocese of Washington. So I stayed at St. John's until I graduated with my MACE degree. And the Reverend Canon Mary Sillerid, I actually worked for the Diocese of Washington in the late 90s, all the way, for years and almost a decade. I was a consultant after that. Mary basically called me and said, hey, listen, I was talking to somebody and they need an interim director of Christian ed and you need to go talk to this guy. And so I did. I went and talked to Wes Medley at Holy Cross and I did that. And I really loved the church. So I told Luis, I said, I've got to take a sabbatical because I'm going to do this little interim job till they find another Christian ed director for 6 months or so. And I fell in love with the congregation. So I started going to both congregations at the same time. And then I finally said, I'm leaving St. John's. And about a year later, they said, do you want to go to the discernment conference? So I did.
So you came to VTS around 2003 to get your MACE degree.
I graduated with my MACE degree in 2005. Okay. I was there. They gave you 7 years to finish it. I did it in 97, 98, 99. And then it took me a while. I wrote the thesis or whatever. And maybe it was 98, 99. I forget, but it was late. It was in the 90s, 98, 99, someplace in there. But I graduated in 2005.
I see. So VTS.
I also graduated in 2015.
Yes, because that's when you got your Anglican studies.
Right.
All right. So I'm seeing the timeline now. So you in January 21st of 97 is when the board changed the policy to where you could be openly gay and be admitted. So then that means you must have called Martha Horn in April
94,
of that.
95, 96, 97. But the policy was still don't ask, don't tell. So I think I had to wait till 98.
All right. So you would have called in April. She would have said, yes, you can come now. You enrolled and started in 98, somewhere in there.
I think 98. Yeah.
All right. So
I can look it up. It's in the records.
Yeah, it's in my records, but so I'm curious. So that whole policy change is an interesting moment in VTS history. Because it changed the focus and shape of the seminary forever. And also at the same time, it was not a unanimous decision across the board.
No, I don't think that Bob was happy.
Well, and so that's my next question. When you started attending VTS,
I had Bob Prichard.
right. And so what was it like, even though the seminary has this policy change? What was it like for you to be a openly gay person attending VTS in the late 90s and the early 2000s?
So it's just me. Maybe it's just me. I didn't feel any different than I feel any other time. Okay. I mean, I didn't talk about my sexuality. I didn't, other than the fact that they met Sylvia. They all seemed pretty accepting of her, but you're talking about the MACE group. You're not talking about the mainstream seminary. You're talking about the summer program where we got together for 4 weeks and we all needed each other, and there were 12 of us. And that's it. Okay. It wasn't integrated with the whole seminary. So it is a completely different sort of a situation.
Was there any, did you feel any sort of tension amongst those 12 people in the MACE
Oh, there
program?
was, I think a guy's name was Pierre. There was one guy who just seemed to have issues and, super conservative or whatever. And you know what? It's kind of like this. I have a set of beliefs, and if I am going to follow my baptismal vows and I am going to uphold the dignity of all people, it means that I'm going to respect you and I'm going to respect your opinions. Doesn't mean I'm going to like your opinions, follow your opinions. I may not even argue with you. My father taught me a long time ago. He said to me, Jamie, it is unethical to have a battle of wits with the unarmed. So just don't engage. Just don't engage. Don't go. It's not worth your time. So you can say whatever you want. My tendency is you can, and you can tell me all the bad things there are about being gay and how I'm going to burn in hell. And I can listen to you and I can talk to you, you can go on and wax on about it. And generally, when I've had that happen, my response has been, well, all sin is an abomination before God, all of it. And the worst sin that we can possibly have is to do what the Bible tells us not to ever do, and that's to judge other people, which you've just done. So see you in hell. And I mean it, okay? If my human sexuality as God created me to be is in fact some subconscious choice that I am making, I guess I'll find out, won't we all? But your judgment of it, I'm positive you're going to find out.
Right.
Wow. See how I drove off the road and you had another question for me that was related, but now it's not? Go ahead.
Now,
I hope you're having fun with this. Was it worth waiting for?
Yes,
After 3 missed tries?
it actually was. How was it different when you came for your Anglican studies program?
Oh my goodness. So there were 8 of us in the Anglican studies program, and most, all of us had graduated from some seminary. One was a Baptist, I think. There were some Methodist. One was, just other ministers who had been ministers, actually actively been ministers in other denominations, who came to understand that, the Episcopalians were actually, in fact, that we are right, and wanted to join us. So yeah, this I will strike from, don't bother even putting it in, just strike that last line,
Okay.
whoever's listening to. So but no, we'd already graduated, and I think most of the seminary between, 20, the bulk of the students were between 26 and 36 years old, the major bulk of students. So the snot-nosed kids, you're going to strike that too, that were there. And then there's some 40 and 50 years olds. And then there's us. We've already graduated. We're just there for Anglican studies. And for 2 of us, we graduated from VTS. So I had to ask all kinds of questions like, are you really going to make me take church history from you? I took church history from you. I got an A. Do I have to really take church history again? Don't you think it's kind of a waste? And it was. I got to, they did make some exceptions, just because it's like, okay, you got an A in church history. No, we're not going to make you take it again. Good, because I really don't. I'll just pull my old paper out. It's not plagiarization if it's plagiarization if I've already written it. So they didn't do that. It was a good program, but what was interesting is that the misunderstanding of what Anglican studies students were, there should have been some more communication. I mean, I don't think the regular students even knew. It's just like, look, there's a bunch of old people in our class now, and they're only here for a year. How's that fair? And I had a discussion with one person who was particularly picky about that, didn't quite get it, and asked me sort of a condescendingly one day. She said, so when you graduate with your Anglican studies, will you have the same amount of credits as an MDiv? And I looked at her, I said, oh, no, I won't. No, I won't have as many as an MDiv, not at all. I'll have 24 more than an MDiv. Oh, it was like, no, we're not just there for 1 year and you go out and get to be a priest on 20 credits that you get in a year. I already graduated. I have 60. You know, so I'll have 84 or whatever ridiculous amount it was, you know, and you guys only need 76, whatever the numbers were. It was, you know, half a dozen more than MDiv. And it was just really kind of like, oh, I said, yeah, and most of these people may have even more. One of them was already had their PhD. So the answer was, yeah, and she has 125.
Yeah.
How many do you need for an MDiv? Oh, yeah. No, we got 20, 30. She got 40 more than you. Yeah. But it was just so, it seemed like such a shock to the poor thing. Like, she thought we were getting some deal, you know. It's like, wow. Yes, it's a whole extra year after already. We have a T-shirt. It says Anglican Studies because graduating from seminary once is not enough. Yeah, no, we do. We actually made up T-shirts, and we all have one. They're purple.
That's funny.
Yeah.
So while you were, you know, attending VTS during all of this time, are there any like key events and moments that really stand out? You know, a lot of people talk about either, you know, Gene Robinson's consecration always comes up, or the Obergefell ruling. You know, did any events come up that seemed to sort of shift how things were going here at the seminary?
Actually, something happened to me when Gene Robinson got ordained, and what it was is I was working for the Diocese of Washington, and they needed somebody to say something on camera, some member of the LGBTQ community, whatever. And so I got asked if I wanted to take an interview with one of the news stations, you know, being an EDOW representative of EDOW and a member of the LGBTQ plus community. And what bothered me the most is that the L word appeared in front of my name. I was really ticked off. But the part of what I said that didn't really get on to the TV was this. I said, the thing that bothers me most about Gene Robinson, about the announcement that Gene Robinson has been made ordained a bishop in the Episcopal Church, is the fact that the only question they're asking about Gene Robinson is about his human sexuality and not about his ministry or the good that he has done in the church and in the world. That's the most difficult thing that I have to watch about this whole thing. It's been a long time coming. It should have happened. It's the right thing to do. But it's really disturbing that all anybody's focusing on is his human sexuality. When I was denied entrance to VTS, my mother said probably one of the more prophetic things. She asked me, she said, Jamie, why didn't they let you into school? And I said, well, Mom, you have to take a psychological, you have a psychological evaluation. And they asked me directly if I was a practicing homosexual, and I told them that I was. And I said, and so the people at the seminary also asked me to confirm that. And, I told the truth. I mean, my mother had always taught us, if you do something and you lie about it, you get punished twice, once for doing it and once for lying about it. And so I told the truth. And she said to me, she said, what kind of voyeuristic pervert would ask you about your sexuality? And when they asked you about your sexuality, why didn't you tell them it's normal? Because it's normal for you. And I said, Mom, if I'd thought about it, I would have told them. My sexuality is simply normal. I said I wouldn't. If they ask me again, I'll make sure to say that. I loved it. What kind of voyeuristic perverts ask you about your sexual preferences in order to get into school? And that was the question I had for VTS. What the heck are you doing? Asking about people's sexuality in order to allow them to be educated. Really? Especially with that etching, the truth and the life and the way. But as long as your paperwork's clean and you've got cash, come on in. Fascinating. Oh, well, part of my story. I guess in some ways, I'm a visual person. I see things in pictures. And this whole thing that happened with VTS, I see myself standing on top of a hill, on top of the holy hill. And it's as if I've taken a snowball and all I did was I threw it down the hill. I think Martha Horn and Jane Dixon and a few other people pushed it until it grew into a giant, huge avalanche that kind of broke apart whatever glass wall was there in front of the seminary. Not a ceiling, but a wall. I just threw the snowball rolling down the hill. And part of it, I think, was because I didn't protest. I asked what it was that I did right. How was my application? I worked hard on it. I got a decent grade on the GRE. So I think that was it. I don't know that this makes me patient A, but
as long as we don't call you patient L. Well, thank you very much.
Are you sure? We've only been talking for an hour and 24 minutes. I mean, we could go for the next 6 minutes, make it even. Right.
Well, I think your analogy of the snowball rolling down the hill is a wonderful way to sum up. And so thank you so much for being willing to roll the snowball. Yeah. Thank you for taking the time to share with me your experience. Before I stop recording, is there anything else you would like to share?
There was a lot of temptation at that time. I was very good friends with a man who had started the huge protest group in LGBTQ protest group. There was no Q plus back in then. It was just the LGB, that's it. And he was actually in charge of rallying thousands of people to come and protest at places. And he was talking to me. He says, I can have 2,000 people in front of the gates of the seminary tomorrow if you want them. I could have actually turned that whole thing into a huge, massive incident. I had no problem with it at all. He was sitting in my living room. He was a good friend. And it was so long ago. He was actually a good friend of a friend of mine. And he said, I'd love to get my hands on that, and I'm like, no. It's not what I'm supposed to do.
Mm.
You know, this isn't a fight that I'm going to fight like this. I want to go to school there. I know that I'm called to do something here. And picking up a sword is not what I'm supposed to do.
Mm.
So I didn't. I picked up the phone and called Martha next year. So, okay, may God bless and keep you in faith and health and love all the days of your life.
Thanks be to God.
Amen. See ya.
Thank you so much.
Sure, it was fun. Keep